We have one more amendment to go through dealing with the President of the United States, and that's going to be the 25th Amendment, which sets up a complicated process that we call presidential succession. So this deals with what do we do when we need to replace a president outside of an election. So you see an example of that here. You see this is President Lyndon Johnson. He's being sworn in as President of the United States. He's aboard an airplane in Dallas, Texas, and that is not the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That is a random judge in Dallas after President Kennedy has just been killed. So this officially made Lyndon Johnson the President of the United States. So in accordance with the Constitution, like we said, all that must be done is that the President recites that oath of office. All the rest of it is ceremony. So it doesn't have to be the Chief Justice, doesn't have to be on the steps of Congress or anything like that. In this case, it takes place in an airplane in a time of an emergency with any judge we got there. And this is what makes Lyndon Johnson replace John F. Kennedy as President of the United States. The 25th Amendment is designed to clarify the process of presidential succession. Earlier, I was telling you the story of the first vice president to take over for President John Tyler, replacing William Henry Harrison. Now, William Henry Harrison died. It was our first president to die. John Tyler just kind of said, all right, I'm the president. I'm going to finish out his term. Nobody knew what should have happened, if there should have been an extra election, if he was just going to be acting president, if he had all the powers. But John Tyler assumed them, and that set a precedent until the 25th Amendment was passed. The 25th Amendment actually says, this is the only time the Constitution says so, that the vice president officially becomes the president of the United States for the remainder of that term if there is a vacancy in office. A vacancy in office can occur because of death, impeachment, a resignation. We'll get to temporary disability in a minute. But if the vice president takes over for the president, then we have a vacant vice president position. So the president, who was the vice president, now gets to appoint a replacement. So that replacement must be approved by a majority of both the House and the Senate. So if the vice president takes over as president, they get to choose their own vice president, but that person must be approved by Congress. The amendment also needs to deal with a more modern situation of what do we do if the president they haven't died, but they cannot be president here. So we have to deal with temporary disability of the president. And so this also sets up a process by which the president can choose to do so. So the president can give a written statement to the president pro tem of the Senate and to the Speaker of the House that makes the vice president the acting president temporarily until the president informs them that they are able to resume their duties. So this has happened in the past a few times. So, for example, George W. Bush, as President of the United States, his vice president is Dick Cheney, and George W. Bush is going to have surgery. He's going to be unconscious for surgery. He's going to be under anesthesia. He cannot be president while he is unconscious. And this is in the middle of the time following the September 11th attack. So we're under constant threat of outside attack. So we need a president at all times to respond as commander in chief. So President Bush is able to tell Congress, I'm going into surgery tomorrow. Tomorrow, Dick Cheney will be the president of the United States, and I will let you know when I am healthy and able to resume duties as president. So this allows the president to make the vice president the acting president temporarily for a situation in which the president is unable to perform their duties. What would happen if the president is unable to make this call themselves? So the 25th Amendment sets up a process where the vice president and the cabinet can make this decision for the president. So the vice president and the cabinet, a majority of the cabinet can decide to submit the same message to Congress. So they have to inform the president pro tempore and the Speaker of the House that the president is unable to perform their duties, and then the vice president becomes the president of the United States. If the president at any point wants to come back and the cabinet and the vice president still say that the president is unable to do so, then it goes to Congress, and Congress will have to vote on whether the vice president will replace the president as the President of the United States for the remainder of the term. I know this is very confusing, but we're talking about a situation where, let's say that President Trump seemed unable to perform his duties as president. Mike Pence, the vice president, and the cabinet could decide, they could by majority vote decide to make Mike Pence the president. If Trump still thought that he ought to be the one that would be president, then Congress would have to vote, and they would be voting on whether or not Mike Pence would replace Donald Trump as president. They'd have to choose Mike Pence with a 2/3 majority in order to get the vice president to replace the president. But this is a check that the cabinet has on the president of the United States. And now this, as we continue to elect very, very old presidents, this becomes more and more important. This was added in the 25th Amendment, but first kind of came up late into the presidency of Ronald Reagan, who was our oldest president before President Trump. And Ronald Reagan unfortunately suffered from Alzheimer's disease after his presidency ended. But he began to show signs, some of his aides say, late in the presidency. And we cannot have a president who's suffering from Alzheimer's disease. They make critical decisions about our safety every day. And so this allows a group like the cabinet to decide to replace the president with the vice president in the situation that the president is unable to perform their duties. This allows us to replace the president if there's a temporary disability, or to replace the president if the president is alive, has not passed away, or vacated the office. But this allows the presidency and the succession process to adapt to more modern scenarios dealing with more modern medical technology. To further clarify this process, during the Cold War, when we're dealing with who would be able to make all these important decisions about military defense against a nuclear attack, they passed the Presidential Succession Act, and it sets up the line of succession for the president here. So if the presidency is vacant, the vice president becomes president. What if the president and the vice president are both vacant? The Constitution says that the Speaker of the House becomes president, but beyond that, the Constitution says nothing. So this law gives us a long list of people to fill this role. So if there is no president, there's no vice president, and there's no Speaker of the House, the president pro tempore becomes the president of the United States. You'll remember that person from Congress. That is the longest serving member of the majority party in the Senate. So this tends to be the oldest member of the Senate. For example, right now in the U.S. Senate, this person is 84 years old. But after those four positions, president, vice president, Speaker of the House, and president pro tempore, then we move on to the cabinet here. Each one of these steps in the process deals with an emergency act that would cause, probably a coordinated attack on the executive branch that would cause many positions to be needed to be filled at the same time. So, if like the 25th Amendment outlined, if the president and the vice president were both killed, on a visit or something like that, the Speaker of the House becomes President of the United States. The Speaker of the House would then appoint a vice president. The House of Representatives would choose a new Speaker of the House. All of these positions would be appointed and filled, approved by Congress, and we'd have all of these positions filled all the way through to where there are currently 18 positions in line of succession for the presidency. So here's our current order of succession. If there's a vacancy in the presidency, obviously that goes to the vice president. The president and the vice president are both vacant. That role is filled. The president is now the Speaker of the House of Representatives. If there is no president, no vice president, no Speaker of the House, then that job goes to the president pro tempore, the longest serving member of the majority party in the Senate, probably a very, very old person. And then if there's no president, vice president, no Speaker of the House, no president pro tempore, then we're going to go through the cabinet departments in the order in which they were created. So our first cabinet departments, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of Defense. Those are our oldest ones. And then they go in the order in which the department was created, all the way down to our newest cabinet department, which is the Secretary of Homeland Security. This order is pretty silly, because the Secretary of Homeland Security is probably, in the event that that we got to cabinet officials being named president, then it is probably because of some massive emergency. Now, whoever is Secretary of Homeland Security is definitely more qualified to fill that role than, for example, the Secretary of Education or the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Agriculture. All these people become president before the Secretary of Homeland Security does, but this is just what the law says. So this always gives us a person to fill the role of president in the event of some type of coordinated attack on the chief executive. All right, so there it is, a very complicated process of replacing the president in the event of a presidential vacancy, the presidential succession process. This is clarified by the 25th Amendment, which sets up the vice president to officially take over, but more importantly, the process of temporary disability of the president, or the check where the cabinet may decide to replace the president. And then, of course, we've got our Presidential Succession Act to clear all of that up. We're going to move on and talk about the roles that the president fulfills from office in their day-to-day operations.